Hey guys, it's Villain Theory, and I'm excited to talk about Shuri's Justice cards. There's a bunch of new ones, and I'm not going to lie to you guys, most of this video will probably be taken up talking about the Raft because it is crazy, but I know what you guys are thinking. BT, you've not had your camera going in the last few videos. What's happened? Where have you gone? Are you okay? And the truth is very simple. I've been using my invisibility gear, so let me turn that off for you. Almost. There we go. So this is a one-cost upgrade with an instruct that says when an enemy would attack you, discard invisibility gear, the enemy schemes instead. Thematically, this is a 10 out of 10 because what normally happens in Marvel Champions is you are in hero form and you're fighting a villain. Heroes and villains fight, so the villain is going to attack you and you're probably going to attack them at some point. If you go alter ego, if Peter Parker is practicing science, the villain thinks, the coast is clear. I'm going to scheme. I'm going to complete my nefarious plans. So it's perfect. It makes them act as if you're not there. So 10 out of 10 for theme. I think this is really fun. It gets a bit tricky, however, when we consider that an enemy scheming is generally considered worse than an enemy attacking. So you are effectively using this card to make something bad become something even worse. And putting a one cost on this kind of card it's definitely pushing this card to be a very niche tool. To give you guys some idea, if you have 5 cards in hand, you choose to play a one cost card and then choose to spend another card on it, you're down to 3 cards remaining out of 5. That's 40% of your, regular cards in hero form that are given to you. And you spend 40% of those cards to make something bad worse with invisibility gear. That's kind of how it shakes out. It's an upgrade. You can use it when you need it. Maybe an enemy is attacking you, and oh no, you would be defeated. Well, now I can make them scheme instead. Maybe there's room on the main scheme, and that's helped me. Yeah, that's good. But what if I just played, some kind of ally or status card or healing or something that means I wouldn't have had to use invisibility gear to make the enemy scheme? Which in a lot of times might actually be bad. It might be a case of, oh, I would lose to the main scheme if I made them scheme. It would maybe make the main scheme flip, put me in a disadvantageous position. Yeah, I don't know, guys. There's decks in Marvel Champions in 2025. If you own all the content, which I understand not everybody does, but decks are bursting with really good options of all different kinds, and this seems very difficult to include. Now, there is one hero, if you play them in Justice, I think this goes in almost all of their decks, that is Iron Man, and that is because Invisibility Gear has the tech trait, and for Iron Man, that basically means +1 hand size in hero form, so he absolutely loves this card, and I don't think the energy resource on Invisibility Gear was an accident. Iron Man loves energy resources on his cards. But back to whether you would put Invisibility Gear in your deck, let me give you a different card as a comparison, and that's going to be Armor Up from Colossus. So Armor Up says when the villain activates, change to hero form. What this actually means for Colossus in solo play, just to make it simple, when the villain would be about to scheme against you, and your alter ego, you can go to hero form, so now the villain is attacking. So as Invisibility Gear takes it from an attack to a scheme, Armor Up takes it from a scheme to an attack. Armor Up takes something that is worse and makes it less bad. It is half the cost at 0, which mathematicians everywhere will be outraged about. But if I have 5 cards in hand and I play a 0 cost card, I've only lost 1 card from hand. Whereas if I, Invisibility Gear, I'm 2 cards down. So that's better there as well. But since it also changes the form of Colossus, it has extra bonuses both for Colossus, but in general, if there was an aspect card that let you change form, that could potentially be very powerful. And obviously, hero cards and aspect cards aren't perfect to compare, but I wanted to give you guys an example. Armor Up is amazing for Colossus for various different reasons, but Invisibility Gear is just a very hard sell. But I think it's more of a tech card. I think it's maybe meant for certain scenarios as an option, and maybe, yeah, like that emergency option when you're getting attacked. But the biggest issue here is that if you want the enemy to scheme against you instead of attacking, every character has this magic ability to make that happen. It's called going alter ego. So the main reason I see to have invisibility gear is if you're playing a deck that never, ever, ever wants to be attacked, you do not want the enemy to attack you. And for me, that means this is a tech card against certain villains, which punish you when they attack. Magneto gains magnetic counters, Magog on expert mode gains 2 rating counters. That is huge. He also has 3 attack there, but only 1 scheme. So making him scheme, is significantly easier than attacking. But for me, I feel like this might be a card that was designed for the new Batroc scenario. He has this ability where after he attacks, you place 1 threat on alert level. If he sees you and can start fighting you, the alert level goes up. You start to get in trouble, all the alarms are going. It's a stealth scenario, and it looks incredibly fun. And having invisibility gear allow you to stealth better in a stealth scenario is great. So that's kind of where I feel this card lives, but it doesn't go in any general purpose decks that I can see, except maybe Iron Man. Let me know if I'm missing something, but for me, Invisibility Gear, low on the efficiency, but really interesting, really thematic, and really fun. So I do like it, but I don't know how much I'm using it. The article which announces these cards kind of made out that this card was going to help you set up Sting Operation, which is another new card, another new upgrade, 2-cost upgrade, Preparation and Tactic, which is kind of interesting. Response: after non-elite minion schemes, discard Sting Operation. Discard that minion. So we're discarding these upgrades to create some kind of interesting effect, and I actually quite like Sting Operation, but it does feel very niche. There's maybe a small handful of heroes, which isn't the end of the world, but it's kind of interesting. So we have a few things going on here. To be able to use this card, we need a non-elite minion, which is already, notably in solo play, far from guaranteed. But definitely even in multiplayer, it's not that simple. Because not only do you need that non-elite minion, it needs to scheme. And this is a response. So that scheme will complete. So you need a minion, someone needs to be alter ego to let that minion scheme. And after that, after you put all the threat on the main scheme, which hopefully hasn't caused a problem, then you can trigger this. Now, Invisibility Gear obviously makes that easier, but it's also inflating the cost by effectively, 2 effective resources, 2 cards from hand, which I don't think really makes it worth it. For a 2-cost card, I could typically expect to defeat a significant amount, if not a big majority, of non-elite minions. Definitely a lot of them. And if I was to add in those extra 2 resources, almost all of them, I would say. So this is an expensive way to get rid of a minion, and you have to let it scheme. Which doesn't seem great. So Invisibility Gear for me, comboed with this, seems more like a fun interaction if you want to try and set it up for like the challenge of it, for the variety. Now again, my decks in 2025 are bursting with cards and good options, which is going to make it pretty hard to fit in both of these to do something that I think is, arguably most of the time overpriced. But there are some exceptions, at least to running Sting Operation on its own. One reason you might include Sting Operation is if your build, your deck, really wants to stay alter ego almost the entire game. They seem to be pushing people to that style. It's kind of been something some people in the community have liked for a long time anyway. Gambit's, pretty good candidate. You can keep exhausting to remove threat. But they added Disguise, which I believe came in Jubilee's pack, which lets anyone effectively exhaust an alter ego to remove threat. So you can put your Disguise on and set up a Sting Operation. It's super thematic. I think that's super interesting. I think Black Widow is an obvious candidate for this. Captain Marvel, I really like with alter ego any builds if you have to. She's got the card draw to make it work. It's surprisingly good. Though, of course, you lose out on a lot. But if you want to lean into that kind of, I don't want to call it a gimmick, but alternative playstyle, Sting Operation is going to be a really convenient way to deal with minions, because when you're alter ego for several turns, sometimes it's going to be hard to find the damage, especially if you end up with multiple minions or something, so this is pretty handy. But then we have the main character I feel like this card is intended for, a character which doesn't need an invisibility suit for enemies to treat them as if they're not there. It's Nick Fury. He has a stealth suit, and it says when an enemy would attack you, it schemes instead. That's all we need to see to know that Sting Operation is going to be really good for him, but if you attack, it breaks you out of stealth form, so Sting Operation helps you on 2 fronts. Enemies will already scheme against you, and it will prevent you having to go into assault form, breaking you out of stealth if you don't want it to. So I kind of see this mostly like a Nick Fury card with a few other niche builds where you could splash it into. The other reason might be to tech against certain scenarios, certain mod sets. So if there's something with, a tough that has really weak scheme, you might not mind going alter ego, letting it scheme for 1, and just, yep, Sting Operation, got him. That Frost Giant didn't see it coming, and you've arrested them. I mean, it's kind of funny. But since Sting Operation says discard that minion, not defeat them, it's especially good against scenarios that have minions with really bad when defeated effects. So it's thematic, it's really interesting. I really do like Sting Operation, but it's gonna have maybe only a few heroes that I think really like it. But with the right mod sets, this could be useful anywhere. Now, if you read the article which reveals these, it suggests Sting Operation is going to be a good combo with that card I mentioned at the start, the Raft. And they interact, but I don't know if they have any synergy which elevates them. So the Raft is a 2-cost support that says, response, after a minion leaves play, tuck it under here from the encounter discard pile. Cost arrow, remove threat from a scheme equal to the tucked minion's printed scheme. So there's another sentence, we will go into that a little bit later. This has, it's a lot of words on the Raft. But what this basically means is when a minion is defeated or discarded, maybe by, Sting Operation, you get to remove some threat from a scheme equal to the printed scheme from the minion that was tucked under there. And this is kind of a little bit weird here because Sting Operation, it's a little bit fiddly to get going. I don't think it's the most efficient way to deal with the majority of non-elite minions in the game, which means you're going through all these hoops to put someone in the raft like this. In my opinion, you can play the raft and just defeat that minion normally with, attacks, damage, whatever. Uh, and you're probably going to be better off a lot of the time. To me, I kind of feel like maybe the designers were scared Sting Operation was too powerful, so they made the raft to counteract it somewhat. Because if the raft removes threat equal to the minion's printed scheme, and the minion just had to scheme so you could trigger Sting Operation, the minion is, it puts threat on from scheming, then the raft is going to take the equal amount of threat back off potentially. But it's very expensive. I don't necessarily think Sting Operation is too powerful. Maybe there are new minions in the new scenarios all over the place that make it really, really valuable in the new content, and that's what they were afraid of. So I'm not convinced that Sting Operation makes Invisibility Gear that much more appealing, and I'm not convinced the Raft makes Sting Operation that much more appealing. But you know what is appealing? The Raft in itself. The Raft is maybe my favorite aspect card in all of Marvel Champions. I don't know if true, but it feels right in my head. It's got so many words on it though, so we're going to take a lot to go through this. So, 2-cost support, location and shield traded. Response, after a minion leaves play, tuck it under here from the encounter discard pile, remove threat from a scheme equal to its printed scheme. If there are at least 4 minions here, deal 1 random minion here to any player as a face down encounter card. So you take out a minion, it's arrested, you send it to the raft, you maybe get some intel out of them, get some threat removed. But if there are too many minions, they start to break out. It is so thematic, it is ridiculously thematic, it is so interesting, and I think it's really well designed. You might think with all the words it is complicated, but defeating a minion, putting it under the raft isn't complicated. Removing threat equal to the printed scheme isn't complicated. And checking how many minions are there, all that stuff. A random one of them, down as a face down encounter card gets a bit more complicated, but it's going to take several minions to get to that point. So for the first few minions, you were kind of learning the card, you're using the card a few times, and then you have to take in the extra words into account. So I think the mental load, from a design perspective, from a play perspective, not going to be that bad. So that's really fun. The theme is perfect. It's so good in that respect. So I'm going to break it down step by step about what it means here. So you need to defeat a minion to get some threat removed. So you might think the primary purpose of it is some bonus threat removal. And yeah, the raft removes threat. But how much threat does a raft remove? So on the one hand, you need the minion to be defeated to get any threat removed in the first place. So if you're playing solo and you don't see a minion for 2 to 3 turns, you could have sunk 2, 3 effective resources into the raft, and you might see very little return. So you're going to have to be careful where you play the raft. Obviously, as soon as you hit something like 4-player, the raft has minions all over the place. It doesn't have to be you who defeats the minion. It can be a minion engaged with any player, defeated in any way, and you will start to remove threat. So now the question becomes, how much printed scheme does the average minion have? How much threat are we going to be able to remove with this? And we can look at the hardest scenarios in the game and see if we can pump this thing up for threat removal. So I've looked at Ronan. Ronan has 8 minions if you have his recommended modular set. 6 of them have 1 scheme, and 2 of them have 2 scheme, which means the average minion we defeat in Ronan's scenario is going to give us 1.25 threat removal. If you get a 2 scheme minion, that's pretty good, but one of the 1 scheme ones, And the other problem is that Ronan's encounter cards are really scary. So every minion you put under the raft means there's 1 less minion the next time the deck resets, which means you might be getting attacked even more by Ronan. Fanaticism becomes more likely. It's not by significant margins, but I just wanted to note that sometimes taking minions out of the deck reset is going to be good, and sometimes it's going to be not so good. For me, would I pay a 2-cost support to get 1.25 threat removed when there's a minion defeated? And I don't know, because here's the thing, if there are too many minions there, one of them escapes and the next turn it gets dealt out. Do you want one of Ronan's minions to escape? They're pretty chunky on health. So they have, keywords, there's Quick Strike, there's Patrol, I think, Guard. I don't know if it's going to be that appealing to use this more than 3 times against these nastier minions. And even weaker minions for a lot of cases, we'll talk about that more later. But I don't know if I would play the Raft over Interrogation Room, which is already a card that doesn't see a lot of widespread play. Interrogation Room is most effective when there are a lot of minions, but in solo, not a lot of minions. In multiplayer, I don't know if Justice wants to take something based on it defeating minions. The nice thing about the Raft is that, in multiplayer, anyone can defeat the minion. I kind of mentioned that already. But again, it's a Justice player taking a deck slot for that. Maybe. But looking at the threat removal here, it is not, super amazing. I definitely think there are some downsides. Now, you might be thinking, but VT, this is just one scenario. Ronan has high health minions, but they're pretty weak. Let's talk about Venom Goblin. He's a really difficult villain. Well, we can look at Venom Goblin's minions, and 2 of them have 0 scheme, 7 of them have 1 scheme, 1 of them has 2 scheme. Probably a good place for me to say this, that yes, some minions have 0 scheme, some have 3 scheme, but the vast majority have 1 or 2 scheme, which means the threat removal isn't, it could be a little bit better. Now, there's a world where you say that the minion escaping, coming back out, isn't worth it, so you only want to wait and get the biggest, 2 scheme or above minions put into the raft. But how long is it going to take to find them? That's such a slow tempo benefit. The average threat removal for Venom Goblin's minions is 0.9. So again, interrogation room is better in that regard. If you can lock the monstrosity away, that is really good. But for the threat removal, the raft isn't doing it for me. Now, fortunately, the raft has a lot of things going for it. We're going to get into some more stuff that is more positive. I want to let you guys know. But I just want you guys to be aware that the threat removal aspect of this card isn't as amazing as it seems. Would I like to pay 2 costs for the raft, or would I like to pay 3 costs for Beat Cop? Beat Cop is super reliable, and Beat Cop will eventually let me do a bunch of damage to defeat a minion. I feel like a lot of people don't use it for that ever, but it is really good. If you deal 4, 5, 6 damage, it's pretty handy sometimes, especially for tempo reasons, especially if you're getting snowed under. But VT, we've only looked at 2 scenarios. What about Magneto? That guy has tons of scheming minions, and now you're actually kind of right, because he has 6 with 2 scheme on and 3 with 1 scheme on. He has 9 minions in his deck. So we get 1.6 average threat removal for defeating one of his minions, and quite often we might get 3 2 scheme minions put in the raft, which means we'll play this 2-cost support, and we will eventually get 6 threat removed, which is pretty good, even if it's a little slow maybe still. It's going to depend on the player count and how the cards fall, and so on, and so forth. So in certain scenarios, the raft doesn't look too bad at all in terms of threat removal, but I know that minions don't really, most commonly have 1 or 2 scheme, and in 1 and 2 player, which is mostly what I play, and it's the most common player count, which is not to discredit the higher player counts, but for a lot of people that I'm talking to here, the raft isn't going to be giving you tons of threat removal in a hurry. 3 and 4 player, it is going to, be notably quicker to give you threat removal, but once you hit the 3 minion limit, you start to have to deal with the minions all over again, because one of them's going to break out. Maybe the worst one could break out. You don't know. And Interrogation Room and Beat Cop don't have any kind of a limitation. So if it's a long game, they are almost certainly maybe going to be more valuable, unless your deck and hero particularly like minions to re-engage you, which we'll go into shortly. The other thing the Raft does is that it removes minions from the game basically permanently, unless the raft somehow gets discarded, or so many minions get put in the raft that the minions start to break out. So any minion which is worse than the average encounter card is going to be a net positive to lock them away when the deck resets. But there is an exception here, which makes the raft incredibly stupid powerful, and that is as a tech card against certain modular sets such as Mr. Hyde, Mystique, Legions of Hydra, and the Doomsday Chair. There's a bunch more as well, but what these modular sets have in common is that they are built around largely a big old kind of mini boss style lieutenant minion that has just, it's really annoying. It's probably very healthy, hits hard, has some extra kind of things going on that make it annoying, and it will have multiple encounter cards which can bring it into play. Obviously, if you're fighting Mr. Hyde and you draw Mr. Hyde, you're going to get him in play anyway, but there are other cards in that set that will try and bring him into play. If you can put Mr. Hyde in the raft, if you can put Mystique in the raft, if you can put MODOK in the raft, it is a game changer. Like, that is so good. The raft is just going to make some of these challenges so much easier. I cannot overstate it, which is really fun and really useful. And imagine in multiplayer, your Justice player busts out the raft, you put Mystique in there, suddenly everyone is happy. That's going to be a great moment that everyone cheers for. The raft is going to make memorable moments. But put too many minions in there, and the raft deals a minion out, as I've kind of established a little bit. So if you're using it to trap a really dangerous boss minion, you're probably not going to want to risk going over the minion limit, go up to 4 minions, because it could be that Mystique or MODOK jump out and put the table in a world of hurt all over again. So this is another really strong reason to suggest maybe in a lot of games, the Raft will be capped at putting free minions in there, and then it's kind of offline, it's going to sit there and just keep them in check. But there are some heroes that like it when minions engage them. Maybe not MODOK, maybe not Mystique, but in general, the average minion. And this is maybe a good time to actually clarify that the Raft works on any minion, so it doesn't matter if they're elite. Sting Operation says non-elite, but the Raft says, I will put any minion under here, and it is stuck, which is why it's so good for those little mini-boss super minions. But some characters, some heroes, love it when a minion engages them. So we have characters like Thor, Rocket Raccoon, Valkyrie, and Nova, where the Raft dealing a minion back out doesn't seem so bad. Thor especially gets to draw 2 cards when he engages a minion each phase. Rocket Raccoon, when he defeats a minion, gets to draw a card as long as he did excess damage. Valkyrie, if Dragon Fang is set up, Death Glow becomes a very efficient way to just defeat minions, get some more threat moved again. And Nova with Unleash Nova Force, I think, has potential as well. I could even mention like Ironheart getting progress counters if use your attack event to defeat minions, but I think that's a little bit of a stretch. But there's a few other examples out there if you want to look for it that benefit from minions. Something I want to say for Thor here is although drawing 2 cards is really, really good, if you're putting 3 minions into the Raft and he's discarding to try and summon in minions to get his card draw in the hero phase, he's going to start shredding that encounter deck because minions are going to potentially become a lot more scarce. And that kind of has its own downsides with, keeping up with threat, thinking about solo here more than multiplayer, but it's definitely something I think to note. However, getting 2 cards drawn and then being able to defeat the minion is going to be pretty good. I think you're going to at least break even a lot of the time, sometimes go slightly over. I just question whether it's worth playing the Raft, trying to get it going. And here's the other problem. You get the minion dealt from the Raft once it's escaped as a face-down encounter card. What if your other encounter card is a minion anyway? You would have got that card draw already, so now you've just given yourself an extra minion to deal with. Now, kind of like I was saying, if you put a lot of minions in the Raft, you have less of a chance to find a minion. So that might not happen as much, but it definitely could. So 4 has some other factors to consider. I do think the Raft will be fun and maybe good for him, but I don't know if it's exceptionally overwhelmingly, oh, this is an auto include, which I've heard some people talk about. But let me know what you guys think. And I think this kind of extends to all the characters here. There are synergies. It's less bad for them than most characters. It might be worth it, but it's not overwhelmingly. This is a huge game changer for my character, at least in my opinion. The threat removal from the Raft is obviously very welcome for a character like Valkyrie, who has terrible threat removal compared to Rocket or Nova. But yeah, I mean, Interrogation Room has always existed for these characters defeating minions. And I don't know if the Raft is going to get you a lot more threat removal, though it is going to be a lot more consistent if you are putting a minion back out against you every turn. And if you're actually doing that, then Interrogation Room becomes more consistent. So maybe there's a build here. I need to try. I do think there's a lot of moving pieces, and the Raft and Interrogation Room are initially slowed tempo, and Interrogation Room isn't going to become more consistent until the Raft is full. So it's a lot of moving pieces here, a lot of factors to consider, but definitely it is interesting. Something else that is interesting is that all of these characters can go aerial, which means that dive bomb hone technique is on the table, especially good in multiplayer. And if you can dive bomb the whole table's worth of minions, having the extra minion in front of you does not matter. You just, blast it down in this huge damage shockwave. If you guys are not aware of the combo, these 2 cards together ends up making Dive Bomb deal 11 damage to 1 enemy and 5 damage to every other enemy on the board. So potentially you don't even notice that other minion is there. We've got other things in the game a little bit like this. Scorched Earth can hit a lot of enemies, that kind of thing, which is interesting to consider. I feel a bit weird about this one because Dive Bomb Hone Technique is like the best thing aggression can do in multiplayer already. It's extraordinarily good. And the Raft is potentially actually going to get you quite a bit of threat removal with this. If you can loop Dive Bomb somewhat effectively, you could put, let's say, 4 minions into the Raft, but there's already 3 minions in there. So all of them pop back out again, keep dive bombing them every turn, and you're going to farm so much threat removal off the Raft. It could be crazy. If it works how I think it works, it may be a little bit risky to, in some regards. What if you run out of dive bombs and there's a bunch of minions? But it is absolutely fascinating. Maybe even Vision would do something with this as well. Collect the minions up against them, then no problem, just leave them attacking him. Such a weird, interesting card. The Raft is... we're still not done yet, guys. We have a lot to get through for this card. One more character I wanted to shout out was Star-Lord, because if the Raft deals out a face-down minion, he's got a new face-down encounter card. He likes that. He's going to get a card draw when he draws up with his helmet. His events on the initial turn are going to start dealing more damage. So that's kind of interesting So dealing a minion out means interrogation room gets more consistent. It means the heroes which like getting a minion can kind of get their benefits, but you still have to then defeat that minion again or suffer the consequences of leaving it there, attacking you, scheming against you, whatever. To get to that point, the raft is going to need several minions in it. So many considerations, guys. I don't think it's just universally good. I don't think it is just even an auto-include even on the characters it's best for. But that's not all, because the raft has something I mentioned earlier but didn't really bring attention to, and the raft has the shield trait. Suddenly, the raft, which doesn't need to exhaust for any of the things it wants to do, despite all those words on it, none of them say exhaust, the raft is the perfect target for the shield events and the man, the myth, the legend, Dum Dum Dugan. So if you're running shield justice, the raft becomes really appealing as a target to exhaust with no consequence, no slowing in tempo, unlike something like Surveillance Team, etc., etc. There's no consequence to exhausting it, and you get the bonus of your events for your trouble. And hey, you defeat a minion, you get some threat removed. So I actually like this combo quite a lot. I think in a shield deck, the raft is going to sing. So it's really interesting to me that this comes in Shuri's pack, and she does not have the shield trait whatsoever. But to me, for the raft to be at its best and most valuable, you are going to want to have a shield deck. Now, the shield justice archetype really came from Spider-Man Miles Morales' precon, and he doesn't have the shield trait. So yeah, maybe it's not so crazy that Shuri has the raft, but I haven't quite seen the valuable combo with it yet in her precon. But bringing the raft into a shield justice deck seems like such a good move that I really like it. And we can take this one step further and get really crazy, because let me talk to you about Maria Hill. Now, this will also work with Spider-Woman and Adam Warlock. These characters can take shield supports from other aspects. So play Maria Hill in aggression, she can take the raft. Play her in protection, she can take the raft. And that sets up some really interesting possibilities. So Maria Hill, with something like Come Get Me Bub or Squared Off, can kind of do her little sting operation, kind of bait in the minions to then send them to the raft, which I think is hilarious and really, really funny. All the while, probably doing some kind of crazy shield shenanigan deck. Protection remains to be seen whether it will have much shield kind of synergy going on the grand scheme of things this expansion. Leadership definitely has some. Justice will obviously have some. If you're running Maria Hill in Justice, the raft won't take one of her free sort of shield support slots from outside the aspect, which is really good. And that will be worse for minion-based shenanigans, but it will be better for Justice event shenanigans with Homeland intervention and that. So still very interesting, but I kind of love the idea of this in leadership because we also have organizational support, which is very much a Justice shield event in design in the way that you have to exhaust things with the correct trait to get a benefit. It's not locked to shield, but if you play it on a shield hero, shield is one of the traits you're going to be looking for to use this with. So organizational support can exhaust the raft, no consequence for the raft and its functionality, to generate an extra resource. So I think the raft in an organizational support build could actually be pretty good. I don't know how much competition there's going to be for Maria Hill's off aspect shield supports. I think it could be quite high potentially, but nonetheless, wanted to talk about this because I think that's really interesting. And we can take it further with the raft in a leadership deck with something like the Cersei, which is a 6-cost support, which lets you basically cheat the cost of allies into play. And then we could have a big ally like Beta Ray Bill, who gets a benefit from defeating minions. So we've used the Cersei to get Beta Ray Bill out. We've got the raft down. Minions are overflowing. They're escaping the raft. Every time one pops up, Beta Ray Bill defeats them, gets the bonus threat removal, the threat removal from the raft, and everyone has a good time. You can even keep Beta Ray Bill alive if you use one of your off-aspect, shield support slots to take Field Agent. So there's tons and tons of crazy combos feeding into each other. It's incredibly fun. Is it worth the very expensive setup to get this whole thing going just for this purpose? I don't know. I don't think so, honestly. But it's so many cards talking to each other here. I don't want to say any definitive statements without playing it. So I'm skeptical, but I thought it was so interesting. And take this to multiplayer, Maria Hill doesn't need to be doing anything else except providing the raft to the table potentially, or any kind of character. You can have a really efficient shield deck, and then you could have 4 in aggression. When the minions are overflowing, just throw them to him. You get all the shield benefits of the raft. He gets all the extra minion benefits. I think there are going to be so many interesting combos here. So in short, I think you need to combine several of the points here to get full, meaningful value out of the raft. But that is totally possible to do, especially in multiplayer. And if you're against a mod set with a super boss minion, a Mystique, Removing them is so good all on its own, and it earns its cost that way. But there's one more thing that makes the Raft a really good thing to include in your decks, even if it doesn't seem, efficient. You don't just have to play by efficiency. Something else you can play by is fun. And the Raft is stupid fun. It is so good that even me, who likes to be, quite efficient, quite consistent, some people would call me a little bit spiky sometimes, even if I'm not, pushing the top most powerful allies in many of my decks, to be honest, especially these days, But it is so good. The Raft is a card I'm going to put into decks where it is straight up bad for or barely worth it because it is fun. Because I want to sit there at the table and defeat that minion and say, send them to the Raft. And just, it's going to be, like I kind of said earlier, it's going to make good moments. And that is the magic of the Raft. So I talked about it a lot here, but this card to me is crazy. So many things to consider. So many different things in operation here. There's going to be some really clever uses of it, especially as a tech card. There's so much potential. It's just crazy. So a huge fan of this card. Whether it turns out to be super valuable, super efficient, super, splashable in all these different decks, I have my doubts. But as a fun card, this is like a 12 out of 10. Whew. That was probably the most I've ever talked about any one card in my life in a video that wasn't meant to be like about one card. That is the Raft for you. Let's talk about something else now, like going undercover. This is really fun, really thematic. You are sneaking around and you get to look at stuff that you wouldn't be able to as if you're kind of on the enemy side. That is the theme here, and they've nailed it. Because this player side scheme, which is 0 cost by the way, the defeating player gets to look at the top 5 cards of the encounter deck. You're kind of in the enemy's base, you kind of know the enemy's plans, you can kind of see what's going on before it happens. That is so good. Then you get to sabotage it. Thematically, so good, because you get to add one non-scenario specific card from among those cards in the encounter deck that you looked at to the victory display. So that card is effectively gone forever. You've taken it away. You've stolen it out of their base. You've sabotaged their plans. It's so good. It's so thematic. It's so fun. I love this. And then it says, then place the rest of the encounter cards that you looked at on the top or bottom of the encounter deck in any order. So defeating this player side scheme lets you look at the top 5 cards. It gives you knowledge. It lets you lock something that is not scenario specific away. Imagine if you find Shadow of the Past and you get to put that in the victory display. It's effectively in its own kind of Raft, like jail, prison thing. It's so fun. But then it goes all global logistics. You get to reorder the cards to some degree. You get to kind of set things up. Going undercover has such a good when defeated effect. The problem is it has 4 threat on it. So you're going to basically need to play, let's say, for just this, to get rid of this, you're going to need to thwart twice with a 2 thwart character. It's not insignificant. And the problem here is you can look at those top 5 encounter cards and there might not be any significant card that if you put it in the victory display, it makes a difference. There could be 5 average encounter cards. It won't be bad per se, but it's not necessarily going to be a game changer, especially if the encounter deck is not going to reset again before the game ends, or if it resets but you only get, a couple of cards into it. It's not very meaningful in that regard. So one of the main reliable benefits for me is that you get to change the order of the encounter cards to set up basically your next encounter phase to be safe, to be, a lot easier than it would otherwise be. Basically, this is global logistics. It's still 0 cost, but it's full threat removal instead of exhaust a shield card, which is, I kind of feel like a worse deal. I'm not actually blown away by this card. I think it will have moments where it's incredible. I think it'll be really fun, worth using for the fun, but in solo and 2-player especially here, it's maybe not going to be a card that significantly powers up justice in any way. Not that it needs powering up, but there are other things we can do with it. Now, to clarify the rules, because I know non-scenario specific is going to confuse some people, we can look at some cards here. We've got Fanaticism from Ronan the Accuser, and at the bottom of this card, it says Ronan the Accuser. This is a scenario-specific card. It's specific to Ronan the Accuser because it says Ronan the Accuser. But Shadow of the Past, being part of the standard set, standard can be in any scenario. It's not scenario-specific. This goes for all modular sets and Nemesis sets as well. Those cards are the cards that, going undercover, can send to the victory display, basically, exile them, banish them. When you get to 3 and 4 player, I do think there is a world where if the team is running something like Overwatch, or better yet, even the odds, you can play this out for 0, and it's just going to get smited by massive even the odds anyway, which is a card that hits all side schemes for a value equal to the amount of players. So in 4 player, it's removing 4 threat from all schemes anyway. Why not play this out and get the bonus? I do think that has potential. The other kind of angle is if you want to make sure that the card you remove is valuable, you could use a card like Global Logistics or Blindfold to actually look first, and then if it's the right time to defeat going undercover or not. The problem for me is that if you're already looking and reordering the encounter deck to some degree, the value of what you're getting from going undercover is diminished because you've basically just done what it's already about to do. It just has a lot of diminishing returns trying to look at and reorder the encounter deck so you can then benefit from something that looks at and reorders the encounter deck anyway. And there's still a chance to use all of these cards together and you still don't find a card that's, especially meaningful to put in the victory display. You could have just discarded it with Blindfold. You could have just, put it at the bottom of the encounter deck with Global Logistics or, whatever. Just there's a lot of options, which in a lot of games will make for a very similar result. To me, a bit like Invisibility Gear is going to be really good against Batroc. I think this player size scheme is maybe going to be especially useful against someone like the Black Widow villain we're getting as the first villain of the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. box, who has these preparation cards. You can look at them and reorder them. But I don't know if it's better than Global Logistics or Blindfold, and I don't know if it's going to earn a lot of deck spaces in very packed 2025 decks, which have tons of cards fighting to get in them. But we'll see. Let me know if I'm missing anything amazing with this. I do think, again, the fun is there, and potentially if it moves something like Under Fire or Shadow of the Past, it could potentially have tons of value, especially in 4-player, where everyone moves through the encounter deck really fast, but it could miss a lot. Last but not least for the Justice cards, we got there, guys. These cards have a lot of stuff going on. We've got Manifold, who has something very simple but very good going on. He's a 3-cost ally. He's got 2 fort, 1 attack, 2 hit points. The response says, after Manifold enters play, choose a player. Already, this is incredibly flexible and gives us so much utility. What do we get to choose a player to do? That player searches their deck and discard pile for a player side scheme and adds it to their hand. This is absurd. We're going to talk about this more. Just very basically, to look at the stats, I want to say that if this response adds a card to a player's hand, it's kind of like refunding part of the cost for Manifold. If you have 5 cards in hand, I choose to play Manifold, I spend 3 other cards on him, I'm down to 1 card in hand. If he adds a player side scheme to my hand, I'm back up to 2. So it's almost as if I spent 1 less. And I will say, a lot of player side schemes, they cost 0 or 1. So he is going to leave you able to play that side scheme, which is really good. But just in terms of value, he's kind of refunding himself by 1 by getting that card into your hand. And we can then compare him to cards like Eros and Beak, which remove 2 threat and have 2 hit points, which is a really good place to be. These are all very good cards still. So Manifold, in terms of numbers, in terms of just thwarting for 2, maybe spending whatever card he gets you on something else, really good. But getting a player side scheme on demand from deck or discard for any player, it's full of potential and consistency. One player side scheme he could get is Superpower Training. So if your name is Ant-Man, you want to get your helmet. Back in the day, you just had to hope it was near the top of your deck or go all the way through your deck. Now, not only can Ant-Man play Superpower Training, but if he doesn't find Ant-Man's helmet or Superpower Training, he might find Manifold in a Justice deck if he's running one, which is incredibly useful. Build Support is another great option. It's super good on its own, but one type of deck Build Support is used for beyond just, getting the good thing for my, trait, like the X-Jet or Uncanny X-Men or something, is Web of Life and Destiny. Build Support is so good to get a Web Warrior deck set up, because until you have Web of Life and Destiny, a lot of your Web Warrior allies aren't going to be doing much or will be completely unplayable. Having Manifold sneak in among the Web Warrior allies to find Build Support early on, to find Web of Life and Destiny much more consistently, it's going to be so good. I mean, I've not even mentioned this really, but Manifold having 2 thwarting for solo basically means almost every side scheme in the game that he finds can be defeated on that turn. He thwarts for 2, you thwart for 1 or 2, and all those 3 threat per person side schemes in solo just gone. In multiplayer, not quite the same, but it's obviously still helpful that he can immediately thwart 2 on that player's side scheme if you so choose to play it when he gets it for you. Manifold can find a specialized training, which is harder to remove the threat for. It's got 5 threat per person, but picture the scene in solo play. You're X23, you play Manifold, he gets you specialized training, you play specialized training, Manifold thwarts for 2, X23 thwarts for 2, you ready up with the claws, thwart for 2, you've got specialized training, turn 1, you've now got the attack boosting card draw for all future turns. That could be pretty crazy consistent to set X23 up very, very well. A lot of what I've talked about here is helping you set up early with vital pieces. Well, guess what? What about the late game with Keep Up the Pressure in multiplayer? When the time is right to start getting ready to finish off the villain, Manifold can find Keep Up the Pressure, put that in play, you can all start to thwart it. You just get an attack event, boosted attack event damage. Really, really so good. So if you're asking me, do I think Manifold is perhaps an S tier ally? I think the answer is yes. in terms of consistency. If you find your amazing upgrade or whatever you want on turn 1 anyway, and you haven't needed to play Manifold, he's probably not going to increase your overall output that game too much whatsoever, but it's a consistency. It just means I can play 10 games and I'm more likely to have 10 good games than if I didn't have Manifold and a good slide scheme in the deck. It's really, for me, a great addition to have. So really strong. And all this before we even consider things like chancing counter that, can get you Manifold early or in different ways or again. It's gonna be so good. But that's not all, because he has the Avenger trait. The Avengers are back, so that means Earth's Mightiest Heroes and Avengers Tower have another target in Justice. Opening up Avenger decks in Justice is really good. You've been able to do them, for a long time now, but they are slightly strained for the amount of allies, especially good allies. So having a very good ally here that, play Manifold, get a play side scheme, play it, defeat it, whatever. Even if you leave Manifold then at 1 hit point, he is now your Earth's Mightiest Hero battery. It's so good to keep readying off if you have a character that it suits. And Avengers Tower, obviously just going to help you play him if you've got that set up, that kind of thing. So the Avengers synergy, more targets for Earth's Mightiest Heroes in Justice. I absolutely love it. It is everything I wanted. The last thing in Shuri's pack, and this video has gone on so much longer than I wanted. These cards are crazy. We've got Okoye and the Dora Milaje. These cards are really interesting. I talked about them a little bit in my Shuri deep dive, so I'm not going to go fully into it here. But Okoye is a 4-cost 2/2 standard ally. It's a little bit overpriced, but then we've got the good abilities, which is obviously what makes up for that and makes them worth playing. And the response on her says, after she uses a basic power, resolve the special ability on another Dora Milaje ally. And this is really interesting because it means that she can't trigger her own special, which means if you just play Okoye, she doesn't, she loses that on value. You can't trigger her own special. What are you going to do? If she's the only ally you've got down with that trait, kind of a dead end ability. So you've just overpaid for the stats, basically. If you do have another one down, we don't know what they are yet, but if they're equivalent to what she has, this is going to be very, very good. So you're kind of playing this big ally early, hoping you have another one already in play or something, or able to be in a position to hold on to have one in play, and you're going to start to get good value. The special she has, presumably all the other Dora Milaje allies are going to be able to trigger from her, is special, choose a Wakanda hero or ally. So that actually would include Manifold, but I don't think he's a good target necessarily. I think you're going to be choosing Shuri Black Panther as a hero, T'Challa Black Panther as a hero, or maybe one of the other Dora Milaje allies. And what it does is it boosts their stats by +1 fording and +1 attack until the end of the phase, which really supports readying. So it's super interesting. It starts to get really, combo heavy in a good way, I think. I worry a little bit about having to set up Okoye and another ally with it, so the other ally can trigger hers and she can trigger theirs. I'm wondering if she has a stat boost, does that mean the other, Dora Milaje ally maybe let you ready a Wakanda hero or ally? Because that'd be incredible synergy, incredibly good for Shuri, but we'll have to wait and see. What makes this card a lot better, though, is the Dora Milaje 3-cost support. A lot of you guys probably saw this on screen, maybe read it already, maybe already knew about it, obviously, but this card follows the Web of Life and Destiny formula. If you have the right trait, you get to ignore its cost, and the right trait is Wakanda, so that's going to be T'Challa and Shuri. And that's just an honorary Wakanda, which I couldn't see happening, unless maybe it's like Winter Soldier if we get him as a hero, which seems promising, but I don't know. So yeah, this is for Black Panther and Shuri mostly, but you could, build support this or just, outright pay for it if you wanted to try and do this on another character. Doesn't seem to be worth it to me as an initial impression, but nonetheless, I like that the possibility is there rather than just say, oh, you can only play it if you have this trait. Its action is really good. It says exhaust the Dora Milaje, resolve the special ability on one Dora Milaje ally, and heal 1 damage from that ally. So if you invest in Okoye, she's quite expensive, but you can keep healing her with this card, keep triggering the special without needing another Dora Milaje ally. If you do have another Dora Milaje ally, they can trigger the special on Okoye, then so can the Dora Milaje, and you start to buff up a hero or another ally's stats like double. If you could ready the other ally, triple. So the combo potential is huge, and I'm really excited to see where this goes. Yeah, just a little bit of a downside. If you get Okoye, let's say in turn 2, nothing else on the board to combo with her, it's going to be a little bit painful to play her, but the potential, it is exciting. So if you couldn't tell, these were my 2 favorite cards, but let me know what yours are. The Raft is so crazy, it's got so much going on, so fun, I think really interesting for shield decks and then multiplayer combos too. I am really, really excited for this. Manifold is just incredibly good. But here's the thing, you might think, oh, Villain Fury quit him S tier, that's boring, I don't need these powerful cards. But I think he's fun because he enables your hero and deck to do what it wants more reliably sooner, which is huge. So this is a massive win for me. Invisibility Gear, not quite so sure on. Sting Operation, some characters, some potential, but really the Raft and Manifold are what I'm most excited for here. So thank you so much for watching. This was way longer than I expected for what this video is, just looking at, I don't know, 6 aspects, such basic cards. But they're really, really interesting. Tony's designs are crazy, and I am excited to see more. See you guys in the next video.